Together can we do it? Yes, we can.
Each man must do his bit.
Welcome to another edition of The Public Interest. My name is David Granger, and on this series of programs, we examine matters of interest to Guyanese, both at home and in the diaspora. And in particular, today we'll be looking at matters that concern Guyanese as individual citizens. And that topic will be Social Security. And it is my view that Social Security is essential for a stable society. Without Social Security, society can become unstable or unbalanced, that you can have very few rich people and a large mass of poor and destitute people. So social stability is a means of balancing society and making society more stable. And therefore, we must pay attention to Social Security, because without it, I feel that we will not only be living in a depressed community, but we are likely to be living in a volatile community. And this is what I want to talk about today. Social security as an essential aspect of social stability. And when we speak about social security, what do we mean? Every society has to devise means of protecting its citizens, and social security is basically the way that society provides for individuals and households to ensure that everyone has access to health care and to guaranteed income, particularly in cases of old age, unemployment, illness, invalidity, injury, maternity, or the loss of a breadwinner. And as you know, as people get older, they are more likely to need more medication. They're more likely to be without a job because they might have been retired and they might be living on a small pension. And of course, the cost of medication would start to rise when, of course, the income has started to fall. So we have a situation, and in this country, as you know, soon after independence, around 1969, the government of the day, led by Mr. Forward Burnham, introduced the National Insurance Scheme. But at the local level, we know there is the NIS, but at the international level, there's also a strong movement. And the United Nations, the International Labour Organization, and of course the United Nations Human Rights Commission agree on a definition of Social Security as a basic human right. This is not an option, it's an obligation of governments to provide Social Security as a right to citizens. Even the Constitution of Guyana, I shouldn't say even, I should say particularly, the Constitution of Guyana provides for the right of free medical attention and also the social care in the case of old age and disability. This is in our Constitution. And specifically, our Constitution says that every public sector worker shall, not may, shall enjoy an absolute, not a limited, an absolute and enforceable right to any pension or gratuity granted to him or her under the provision of any law or collective agreement of any kind whatsoever. That is what our Constitution has promised every citizen. And in the broader context, know what the United Nations, the International Labour Organization, and the United Nations Human Rights Commission say about Social Security. And in Guyana, of course, there are other supportive legislation in the form of the Old Age Pension Act, which ensures payment of old age pensions, what they call SOAP, so State Old Age Pension. And there's the Poor Relief Act for the relief of persons who are deemed to be poor. And there is, of course, the National Insurance and Social Security Act, which guarantees or provides for the payment of old age benefits to older persons. Uh, the coalition which I led between 2015 and 2020, the AP and AFC coalition, also promulgated a national policy on aging, which was aimed at the social and cultural integration of older persons in the mainstream of society. You know, there are some politicians who speak of older persons as fossils. Well, I suppose they will never grow old. Well, people do grow old, and our government, our administration, sought to integrate those older persons into the mainstream of society and not treat them as fossils, as some people like to speak about. In my view, Social Security is a necessity. It has a powerful impact at all levels of society because it provides for workers, and that's the biggest class, the working class, and their families. Um, it provides for them in terms of protecting them against the loss of income, sometimes for short periods in the case of injury, or for longer period in the case of maternity, and of course sometimes if they're invalided, it could be until they die. So Social Security is a sort of safety net, and it's a means of reducing poverty to make sure that those persons who have been unemployed or are injured or ill, are not cast to the sidelines of society. It therefore helps to promote social inclusion, and I prefer to use the expression social cohesion, to bring together people of different assets and abilities in the mainstream of society. It helps to ensure that labor relations are stable, so people are not fearful of being dismissed and being left destitute. And it helps to sustain the country's standard of living, the quality of life, by alleviating the stress, which could be caused by structural or technological change. Some of you may remember growing up, there used to be a lot of people called stevedores, at the waterfront. Well, they're not stevedores anymore. And you remember after the structural adjustment, as it was called, the ERP, in the early 1990s, late 1980s, many people lost their jobs, and we had to create something called the Social Impact Amelioration Program, so that persons would not be left destitute. So it happens because as society changes, even in agricultural communities, persons who might have labored in the fields are being replaced by machines. And even in offices, when you used to have a lot of switchboard operators and a lot of typist clerks, of course, you don't need those persons anymore. So structural change, economic change, could bring about a loss of employment. And Social Security helps to preserve stability in society, so technological change wouldn't be too disruptive and wouldn't cause discrimination against people who are left unemployed. We're therefore looking, my friends, at systems which prevent people from being excluded from the social safety net because of age, because of disability, because of disease, because of injury or poverty, and sometimes because of lack of education, about the benefits. Many people do not know or do not trust the system that we have in place to provide benefits for them. And don't forget, Guyana is not Georgetown, Guyana is not the coastline. There are many communities, from Imbotero in the north down to Wariba now, to Charlton, to Conishin. People never heard about Social Security and never trusted, putting money or registering, for benefits under the NIS scheme because it's a contributory scheme, and both the employer or the employee can contribute. So you don't have to be working with the government to be a member or to be registered under the NIS. But unfortunately, many people are not registered, and when they require assistance, they can't get benefits because they're not registered or they're not qualified. Um, in particular, in particular, many women, perhaps more women than men, are affected because women are more likely to be involved in casual labor. Sometimes they're housewives, and they're not being paid in a formal sense for the work that they perform. Many of them are vendors. I think if you go by the market or maybe in some streets, you'll see that many women are in what is called the informal economy. It means that there's no employer who would submit NIS, who would submit them to NIS registration and so on. So many women in casual labor, in vending, in the market, in housekeeping, and doing some types of employment may fall outside of the safety net. This is something that we need to prevent. Uh, Social Security, therefore, could be less effective or could be diminished or have less of an impact on older persons who are not qualified or not registered. Sometimes they may not be qualified or because they don't have sufficient contributions. And we know of cases in which rich, powerful people in society, sometimes organizations, have taken benefits, extracted contributions from the workers and not paid those contributions into the NIS. The result is when the workers need the benefits, they are told that they don't have the required amount of contributions. And this is a big problem. And sometimes companies, sometimes security companies are involved in extracting contributions and not remitting them to the NIS. So workers can suffer if they're not alert, and they may be deemed as unregistered or even unqualified. So every worker has to pay attention to his or her own interests. And it is not possible to live on what they call a SOAP, SOAP, the state old age pension. I think it's just about $33,000 now. And it is way below the, the amount that is needed for a person, much as a family, to survive. And sometimes people are not working with a company, or maybe the company might have been dissolved, and they no longer they no longer enjoy the benefits of some pension scheme in the company because the company has just disappeared and left them shipwrecked. Even the SOAP, the state old age pension, which many people look forward to, even though it's quite small, is much lower than this old age pension in Trinidad and Barbados. And we like to boast that we are, fast growing economy, but in terms of old age pension is not fast growing at all. The old age pension leaves a lot of old people way behind. And as I said, we're way behind Barbados and Trinidad in terms of state old age pension. Another issue we need to examine is the fact that the amount of older persons is growing from year to year. By older person, I mean persons over the age of 60. And, maybe 20 years ago, you only had about 46,000 or so persons who were classified as older persons. But by 2020, when we left office, there were 85,000. And the numbers continue to increase every year. And this pattern will not change because of changes in medical technology, standard of living. People are living longer, and it means that we can't rely on stopgap measures. People are becoming older. Sometimes they migrate to get medical treatment, from chronic diseases. And instead of dying off in 60s or 70s, they're living until their 80s and 90s. And for some reason in Guyana, particularly, I don't know about other countries, women seem to outlive the males. I don't know the reason for that, but that's another story. So, as you know, in the APNU AFC coalition between 2015 and 2020, we continuously strove to increase the SOAP, the state old age pension. I remember going into Parliament, the 10th Parliament in 2012. It was about $7,500. It was laughable. And the APNU AFC had to fight down the PPPC. We were in the opposition, but we had a margin of advantage in voting. And we continue to push for better, higher state old age pension from 7,500. And I think by the time we left office, it was 20,500. It was very gratifying, my friends, to receive, cards from pensioners. Thank you, Mr. President, for raising. Not that it is much. And even out of office, we continue. And I must say the PPP administration has made small incremental steps to improve the state old age pension. I'm speaking about pension, but when we speak of Social Security, it is not just about pensions. It is a wider net. But in Guyana, the main organ, the main mechanism to provide for Social Security for older persons, like myself, is the NIS. And this was established before we became a republic by the PNC administration at the time, led by Forbes Burnham. And from that time, the measures and the mechanisms or the means of providing for Social Security have not really kept pace with technology. It should be, a Social Security system, a whole system, not just an old age pension scheme, so that persons whose employment is interrupted by illness or injury, and of course everybody gets old, everybody becomes a fossil, as the PPP like to call people. Persons become unemployed through age, and persons who die, sometimes prematurely. And there are other exceptional circumstances, not necessarily accidental, like birth of children or death. So NIS must provide some income safety net for all categories of vulnerable persons and provide them with benefits. And it is not yet a comprehensive Social Security scheme, but we're moving there. Right now, NIS, I think, should have about 60,000 pensioners. And every month they make claims, and in a year, I would reckon every month there are about 1,000 claims for benefits which people feel that they are entitled to, which they didn't get. But generally, the NIS should be paying out about $2.3 billion every month, benefits, illness, injury, and pensions. And the appeals tribunal, as I said, maybe has to hear about 3 cases a day. So it means that there is still some dissatisfaction, and the appeals tribunal investigates those complaints to make sure that people get what they're entitled to. And the bulk of the payments made by NIS, the bulk of the payments really for old age pension, and then you have sickness benefits, you have survivor's benefits, and you have maternity benefits and benefits for injury, funeral, and invalidity, which is a smaller percentage. So it is working, not working well enough, but we will look at the reasons why the NIS operations have been compromised, have been damaged. And this is because the People's Progressive Party civic administration has never comprehensively addressed the sustainability of the scheme to ensure benefits. In fact, in the earliest days, they actually campaigned against and discouraged their supporters, even though many of their supporters are the largest block of beneficiaries, for example, for people in the sugar industry. So right now, the NIS is actually spending more than it earns. And it was badly damaged a few years ago when one of the PDP presidents actually pushed money into CLICO, which collapsed. And they pushed money into the Borbis River Bridge, which of course meant that instead of using the surpluses or building up a fund to ensure that the workers, the contributors, got higher pensions, the money is being plowed outside of the scheme into things like CLICO and the Borbis Bridge Corporation. So we had about 6 billion going over to CLICO. And when the APNU AFC got into office, we had to bail out the NIS because the money that should have been used for your benefit was pushed into the Borbis River Bridge. That is what the PPP was up to. So sometimes they complain about the APNU AFC, when in fact they damaged the scheme, and the APNU AFC had to repair that damage to ensure that the beneficiaries, people like you, ordinary working people, were not disadvantaged. And this is what happened. In 2017, we had to find $5 billion to stabilize the NIS, or else the NIS would have been broke. The NIS would have been broke. At this stage, therefore, all of us, not just the pensioners, but every citizen, every Guyanese, who should be provided for under this social security safety net, as they like to call it, should worry or wonder or should be concerned about the way forward. And I want to quote from the United Nations. I'm not inventing a formula or a slate or a program of recommendations. I am looking to the United Nations, a world body, and they make 4 basic recommendations. First is that there must be accessibility for everyone to have access to the scheme. What happens is that in Guyana, many people live in remote communities. Everyone is not on the coast. There are many people in the hinterland spread over a vast distance, which is bigger than England and Scotland combined. And people may not know of the benefits, or they feel that if they work for $100,000 a month, they must use up all of that money, and none of it should be put into an insurance scheme. Well, nothing in, nothing out. So the United Nations recommends that there must be accessibility for everyone, everywhere in Guyana, especially for the disadvantaged and marginalized groups. And sometimes people don't know when they may need assistance, injury or illness, for example. So without discrimination, there should be greater accessibility. That's the first A, coming from the United Nations, not from me. The second A is adequacy. The benefits that you get from the NIS or any other social security scheme must be sufficient to ensure that you can look after your family, you can protect your family, and you can get sufficient assistance to ensure a reasonable standard of living. That may shock you because of the damage that has been done in the past to the NIS. Some of the benefits are very low. I mean, you can say they're better than nothing, but they're very ill. That's the second A, that they must be adequate. The benefits must be adequate. The third rule, I would call it, or principle, coming from the United Nations, not from the top of my head, is affordability. That the costs and charges associated with contributions are economical for everyone. That is to say that the workers' contribution must not be excessive, that they try to avoid and avoid payment. And as I mentioned to you, there are companies which have been investigated and prosecuted by the NIS. I know some very small enterprises which are visited by NIS inspectors. And there was one notorious delinquent company where the CEO chased NIS inspectors off the premises because they were taking the workers' contributions and not remitting them to the scheme. And the fourth rule or factor that you should consider is the one of availability. That is, the laws of the country must support the enforcement of these regulations so that the benefits to be arrived or to be derived from the scheme are effectively administered and supervised. My friends, all the persons, that is people of the age of 60 years and above, deserve to be treated with dignity. They're not fossils. They deserve to be treated with dignity. And they must not be forced to rely on charity, pity, and handouts. Social Security should ensure that every Guyanese should enjoy the good life until their final days. That is what Social Security should mean. It should give us the good life until we take our last breath. Thank you, and may God bless you.
Let us cooperate for the young. Let us cooperate for our land. Let us resolve to fight together. See we do it right together. Can we do it? Yes, we can.
Each man must do his